What's going on, Better Than Rich audience? Today you are in for a real treat. It's a dear friend of mine. His name is Dr. Brian Lumb, and he writes of himself on the surface. He's been a semi-mild-mannered chiropractor for the last 27 years. But for those of you who have gotten to know Brian, that is all merely a facade for his real work that he's doing. You know, working with people, changing the planet, helping them come to awaken and realize who they really are at their core. Brian and I have a wide-ranging discussion in this podcast, you know, ranging from how do you find a mentor all the way to how do you manage interpersonal relationships to how do you really discover your true essence? How do you live with ease in your life? And that's what I admire about Brian so much is just his willingness to listen to the energy, listen to the universe, listen to God, and follow the direction and the little winks that he gets along the way. And because of that, he lives a blessed life. And because of that, he learns so much, he wants to give it back to you. So they have something called Nourish and Flourish. They have something called, the Genius Frequency, him and his wife, Chelsea Ray. And I just really want to strongly encourage you guys to check it out if you enjoy this episode, which I'm sure you will. So dive right in. I mean, he's worked with people like Tony Robbins. He's flown on Tony Robbins' personal private jet. He's worked with Jaya, who's this sex expert who also is in the personal growth space. He's somebody who really brings this new energy to helping you revitalize both your physical experience, but also your emotional, mental, and spiritual experience. So if that intrigues you at all, stay tuned. You're going to enjoy today's episode. Let's get started. All right, Brian, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, man. So glad you're here. And it's just awesome to finally have a chance to introduce you to the audience. I feel like you're like this magician friend of mine that I like to bring out. And, hopefully that doesn't sound degrading, like you're some, dance, monkey dance. I deeply honor kind of what you do and how you are and who you are. And I just know, when I say magician, it's almost like when someone's able to talk to you and meet with you and have a conversation with you. And, a podcast is a chance to have a conversation with somebody, right?
Totally.
And
I'm down with magician. I'm cool with it. We'll define it as we go here.
You're comfortable with that moniker. What I mean is everyone that I introduce you to is amazed, right? And so listener, hopefully you will come away from this conversation feeling similarly. But I'd love to start, man, and dive into, who are you? What do you do? And why would I say such a crazy thing to start this thing off? Tell me more.
Well, thank you. I mean, I think the weird thing about being oneself is, like, for the most part, that's what that's your reality. And so it's through the lens of your own life experiences, reality that, that's branded normal to a certain degree. And so, I look at me and I'm just like, I'm normal, like everyone, and I also, because of my life, my experiences, my teachers' teachings, all that stuff, I tend to look for and see through the lens of, like, what's magical about this person. So I think normal is kind of a dirty word. Like everyone in the culture on some level, like, wants to be normal. Like, do I fit in? Am I part of this? And I mean, certainly in terms of my wounding landscape, and the reason I say that is, I semi-joke, but actually am very serious about it in saying that Earth is a trauma-based learning center. And if you don't know that by now, if you don't realize that is the school through which you've enrolled in, then it will seem worse than it really is. But kind of as soon as we realize, like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm going to get messed up here a little bit. And that you recognize that part of that getting messed up is part of the package of you growing and becoming awake and aware and alive and fully human. So I see people on some level and I'm, like, curious. I'm like, okay, what's their special sauce? Like, what's their magic? And I want to get right to that. So I kind of tend to, like, swipe away anything that's not that. And I'm just, have been voraciously curious about people and who they are. And like, I have this thing that like, if you're in front of me, then you're special because I remember my specialness. And it hasn't always been that way, but I assume that like, either you remember your specialness or this conversation is supposed to in some way, shape or form inform you of that. And so then that's my gig. That's what I'm going to do. That's who I'm going to show up as. You know, and then how I got that way was that the question? Who am I and how did I get this way?
Well, what I'll just say is, again, that's a beautiful answer. And what it's kind of speaking to is, you know, just how much you are embodying something so that either someone remembers their specialness, or just by being in proximity with you, they start to remember it. Right. And again, even just listening to this conversation, whether you're watching it on YouTube, you're listening in the car, wherever, you know, maybe there's a certain quality to the energy that you're experiencing here. So yeah, you know, how did you stumble upon this, or is this something that you were taught, or what would you say?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I grew up in a really special kind of ecosystem. My parents, in many ways, certainly attracted to each other for a certain reason, but they were also like polar opposites. So my mom was a music teacher. She was my Catholic school, grade school music teacher. And my dad worked for NASA. His job was to keep satellites afloat and taking photos of the Earth, you know, way back before, you know, personal computers and like, I mean, Google Maps. It's like everyone kind of takes that for granted. And my dad was on this cutting edge of science and space. And so, you know, it's like music and, you know, research scientist. And at the same time, crazy enough, they both grew up in this very small town in Kansas called Manhattan, Kansas. They affectionately refer to as the Little Apple, which I'm sure New Yorkers are just like, what? And so my dad was like an only child on a farm in the 30s, like Dust Bowl, Kansas, only child. Like that just seems like the worst possible scenario to grow up in.
I've read Grapes of Wrath.
Right.
That's what I'm imagining.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
Totally. Like that's my dad. Right. So,
Yeah.
you know, and both of them love music. So my dad was a musician also. They met in high school band. And he also was smart enough to know that he couldn't make any money doing music. And so he asked his music teacher, like, hey, I want to do music, but I don't want to farm. That's what I know. I don't want to farm. And his teacher said, like, well, you know, you could become an engineer because music has a lot of like mathematics in it and you're really good at it. So consider that. So sure enough, my dad takes the path of engineering. He becomes the first to graduate from Kansas State University with a PhD in electrical engineering and is scooped up in Northern California, like before the birth of Silicon Valley by NASA at Ames Research Center. So I was born in 1968. And I like to say that I was basically kind of born with and in the frequency of Silicon Valley as it was exploding. So literally Apple, Hewlett Packard, IBM, all those things were just like around the corner. Those were the garages, you know, in the cul-de-sacs from which I lived and grew up in. So there's all of that. And then there's also the fact that my parents were into some really weird shit. So like you know, this is like 70s California, you know, but it wasn't like Grateful Dead drugs 70s California, although that was just like a hop, skip, jump away. They were into, so for instance, a lot of people these days know what Reiki is, right? And so when I was 7 years old, Reiki is basically a Japanese art form of hands-on healing that's become very popular. You know, of course, I say many people know what Reiki is these days, and of course, I live in Asheville, North Carolina, so you know everyone.
Yeah,
you know,
many people who we talk to regularly know what Reiki
that's
is.
Right. That's right. Yeah, yeah. In the slice of you know humanity that we have conversations with.
Sure.
So, anyways, I received Reiki. I learned Reiki from the woman who brought Reiki from Japan to Hawaii to Northern California. And I was probably one of the first 100 people in the world at the age of 6 years old to receive Reiki. And she was a powerful badass. She was like, I remember her. I mean, I was a tiny little kid and she was tiny. She was probably less than 5 feet tall, but she was this powerful woman and I could feel it. I could sense it. Like I knew adults. And then here was this woman before me who had this something extra. And so at a very young age, I was like, what is that? Like I'm in the room and she's like talking to me like I'm a conscious, woke adult. Like she's
Mhm.
not talking to me like I'm 7 years old. She's like, she kind of had the same, like, I think I was gifted that, like, if you're before me, you must be important. You know what I mean? From that moment, I'm kind of getting that in this moment. Like, I think she was thinking, like, hey, you're a little kid. I don't care if you're 7. Like, if you're before me, you're important. So here we go. And that moment, imprinted me. It impacted me.
Mhm.
Later that year, I would go to Japan and receive private lessons from Dr. Suzuki, who I'm sure you know because you're a
Yeah.
consummate musician. And
Amazing.
so I have black and white photos of me as a little redhead kid. You can't see the red because of the black and white, but I've got this bowl haircut. And I'm sitting there playing cello with Dr. Suzuki over me. So I had these experiences. Then I learned transcendental meditation when I was 8. My dad was best friends with chiropractors. I decided I wanted to be a chiropractor by the age of 9. All these things, which of course, later down the road, I was like, I don't want to be a chiropractor because every time I would tell someone I wanted to be a chiropractor, they would give me this weird look like that's a quack. And
Mhm.
so I changed it to dentist until I got into college and chiropractic and the culture caught up with chiropractic. And then I literally was in the college library and saw chiropractor as one of the top like 15 professions that you can make money at in like US news and world reports. And I was like, okay, I guess game
So
back on. Cause
you were in the chiropractor closet, right? And then
I
you
was,
became.
I was totally closeted. Yeah. And I mean, I denied it so much that I didn't even know that that is what I wanted until
Sure.
I had moments where I felt really lost. And I
Mhm.
kind of was remembering back to like, well, what did I want to do when I was a little kid? And I was like, maybe I should just be a chiropractor. I mean,
Mhm.
Jesus, I've like grown up around this shit my whole life. So that's what I did. And that was the beginnings
Hmm.
of it all.
Well, it's certainly a fascinating kind of like origin story.
Yeah.
Mom's a musician. I can see the drum set in the background. We were kind of
Right.
jamming beforehand. We could just end the podcast now and just play you guys out for another 45 minutes of
Right. We'll
completely
just
improvised
jam.
music. Um,
Yeah.
but maybe another time we'll do that. And then your dad's a NASA engineer, right?
Right.
Just
Yep.
as NASA is you know beginning to become what it would be. And then there's these cool interactions, right? Whether it's this woman
Mm-hmm.
who imprints you in this
Mm-hmm.
moment when you're young,
Yeah.
training with Dr. Suzuki, transcendental meditation. Like there's there's moments, right, where you're being influenced and imprinted. One of the
Mm-hmm.
things that came up, kind of an interesting question was, you worked with this Reiki master, right? This woman
Mm-hmm.
who basically brought that to the U.S. Anytime we're working with somebody, whether it's a coach, someone who's in healing work, someone who's an advisor, or a personal trainer, even no matter who we're working with, there's a big difference between like the slice of the pie at the top, and then just like
Mm-hmm.
everyone else, right?
Yeah.
And like working with the top 1%, a top 5% sort of person.
Yeah.
I, I don't know what my question is. I guess the curiosity is, how do you find something like that, or find someone like that, or how do you discern that
Mm.
this person really knows what they're talking about, and this
Right.
person, maybe they've grasped a few truths, but like their
Yeah.
level of mastery isn't quite
Yeah.
there? What would you say to that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's kind of like someone who's a wine,
Mm,
aficionado to,
mhm,
so to like a sommelier, right?
mm,
um, if you're in that upper echelon, it's like, because you've had so much experience with that particular thing, in this scenario, wine, right? And
mhm,
so there's a certain level of like time space repetition, which is just refining and defining the taste, the perception, the sensory acuity,
mhm,
and literally the neural pathways that allow you to like have that level of discernment where you're like, I taste leather on top of Arizona rock. And you're just like, why Arizona rock? And it's like, well, because of this particular iron content,
Mm.
And so I think if we were to like translate that over to the realm of like someone who's a phenomenal coach or an amazing healer, there is and I think this is baked into the matrix of how it all works, right? When I was first starting out as a chiropractor, I felt like I was so under capable.
Mm.
I felt like, I'm like telling people like, hey, pay me money to help you. And internally I'm like, can I really help this person? I didn't have the value in myself, nor did I have the experience and real skill set at that time. Right.
Mm.
So who did I attract? I attracted in people that I could help. And this is what I was told in kind of the cracks between my conscious awareness. And it's almost like kind of a waking dream. I can't remember the exact moment, but I would get messages like this throughout my life, and they would inform me, they would instruct me. And so this was a really important one. It said basically, in the beginning, you will be set people who are mostly there to teach you. So
Mm.
about 80% of the people that hire you are there to teach you, and they will pay you money, and it is fair. And I
Mm.
was like, okay. And there will be about 20% or less that you will actually help, and they will pay you, and it will be fair. And I was like, okay. And then it was over time, the ratio of teaching to giving will change. And eventually, if you receive in this way and fully receive, meaning being grateful and honored to receive the money given to you by people that wouldn't actually get better, but they would teach you. And that is a law of the universe that you cannot comprehend, and nor should you attempt to. And I was just like, okay, now I'm giving it in terms that are a little bit more lofty because I'm a finer wine now. So if I were to tell
Mm.
you that story when I was 23 years old when I received it, it wouldn't have that flavor because I'm a different human being, and I've been able to, coalesce all the experiences in my life and refine it into this in this way right now. But the basics are still there. Does that make sense?
Nice. Yeah,
So, I
absolutely.
mean, and this is what I tell, like, when I was teaching other chiropractors, this is one of the first things I would teach them. I would say, listen, this is like $1 million+ here. This will allow you to sleep at night. And I've shared that with as many people as I possibly can, that I'm like in that role where I was and I am now where I am now. I know that whoever comes to me, 90% of the people I can help in some way, shape, or form. I still have a percentage of people who are my teachers. That will
Mm.
never end. As no matter how good you are, I still
Mm.
feel that there are those people who are going to pay you money, and they're going to teach you things. So, kind of to answer your question, is that story. And then I think another real easy tell, like if you're just at the poker table, is like, if they have to tell you they're great, then are they?
And even energetically, right? Like, how does this person make you feel, right? Just,
Totally.
do they give
That's a
you good
huge one.
vibes? Yeah.
And then we also get out of, so there are two levels. There is like actual expertise over time, and people that
Mm.
are just naturally brilliant, right? But there's also like the soul factor, which is like, you don't need someone there's kids out there who, like, just like me, just like you at some point in your coaching
Mhm.
career, who don't have a lot of experience, don't have a lot of talent, but they're a perfect soul match.
Mhm.
And so it's just like, hey, this is kind of a average crap wine, and this is kind of an average crap cheese, but put them together, they are perfect. And weirdly, if you ate the cheese alone or drank the wine alone, you would just be like, why are you giving this to me? But somehow when they're together, they're like, it just works. And
Sure.
so, no offense to, someone being a crap human being working with another crap human being, but what I'm saying is, like, the experience level, there's something more that I think that people miss in terms of like the soul that's in front of you, where the
Mhm.
experience, is not really so much important as it is
Right.
just like, you're resonant with this person, so there's exchange.
Right.
Let's do it.
I like that, and it's the soul match, and it's even like a timing match, and it's
Totally.
a, you know, um, everything just kind of aligns, right? And so it's like, oh, this is the person I need, right, for the next year. This is the person I need for the
Absolutely.
next 6 months. This is the person that
Exactly.
the next 3 years, I'm going to kind of go on this journey. And maybe that becomes a stepping stone. Maybe it becomes a lifelong relationship, right, in a
Exactly.
coaching sense or something like that. But you're always kind of you're matching energetically at that moment. Like some of you listening, like if you went to go, not not for nothing, but it's like if you went to like go to the upper echelon of executive coaching, like they'd be teaching you things you would have no context on anyway, or it'd
Exactly.
be way out of your price range. It's like you gotta find something that matches. So it's a good point that you're
Exactly.
bringing forth. I love that.
And so from that perspective, then it's kind of everything equalizes, right?
Right.
So then there's a match for everyone.
Hmm.
And it seems to me that like that seems like the universe that I want to inhabit. And in my experience, that is what happens.
Yeah.
But it's also a
Yeah.
nice story.
I think that's accurate.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for indulging me on that question. One thing that comes up is just why chiropractic, right?
Mm-hmm.
You've dedicated your life to this practice.
Yeah.
You've gone on this amazing journey into the technical aspects, and then also, learning nuanced techniques inside chiropractic. Then you've actually, in some ways, almost like transcended it at this point, where
Yeah.
you've said, okay, I'm using chiropractic to inform what I do in my practice, but what we're doing at Genius and all the the workshops that you guys are up to is in some ways has almost surpassed it. So,
Yeah.
but for the uninitiated, they might go working on my back, like relieving my
Right.
back
Right.
pain.
That, yeah, totally.
Like
Doesn't make
this
any
guy
sense.
doesn't seem like somebody who just wants to help people relieve their back pain. I think he's here for something else. So, what would you say?
Yeah, and I mean that's been something my whole professional life, so I'm in my 28th year of being a chiropractor. And which is crazy. I mean, I'm like do I even feel like I'm 28 years old? Like how is that even possible?
I feel 20. I feel like I'm about 28, 29 right now,
Right?
to be honest.
Totally.
Yeah.
It's a good thing. It's a good thing to feel young when you're aging. Um so why chiropractic? Essentially, the early parts of my story, of why chiropractic, I think were just like I had a lot of association. I had proximity. My dad knew chiropractors. My dad created an instrument that was utilized by some famous chiropractors. And so it was just like it was in my environment. And that was part one. Part two was it just resonated with me. Like I am a experiencer
Mm,
um, through my body. Like I've always been, I love physical comedy. Like I love when someone gets
mm,
physically comedy, when they're using their body to describe and explain something. Um, I'm
mm,
just a fan. I've always been a fan of the body. I experience through my body very much, always have. So much so when I was a little kid, I had to like really numb myself out because I was experiencing too many things that I didn't know what to deal with.
mm,
So the chiropractic just made sense. Now, down the road, when I had to re-ask that question as an adult, like, why do I want to become a chiropractor? Then there was just a pragmatic, like, okay, I think I can pay the bills. I think I could make a living doing this. But then when I got into chiropractic college, then it was like this remembering. It was like this recalling of like, oh, this is why. When you like make a decision, you're like, it all makes sense. But then you do it and you're like, you're deep into the decision. You're experiencing the act of having made the decision and living it. And you're like, oh my God, I had no idea. Thank God I made that decision. There are all
mm.
the layers and levels that you just couldn't know at that time until you experience it. So that's really what happened. And ultimately it was kind of a reclaiming of the origins of chiropractic, which are very simple. It's basically the purpose of chiropractic was to unite man. So, in these days we say mankind or humankind, let's say,
Mhm.
um, the physical with the spiritual. And
Mm,
we do that through the nerve system. Well, fast forward 100 plus years and, science and consciousness and spirituality are all coming to very similar conclusions that they did in 1895, which is the spine and the nerve system's the conduit of consciousness.
mm,
Science even further is basically saying like the brain is basically like a receiver and a transmitter, but it is not like where consciousness comes from. And we know this because of so many studies in near-death experiences. People who die, Their heart doesn't work, their brain doesn't work, and yet they recall with great detail what things look like, what people are saying, smells that are had. So it's just like, well, okay, well, if the brain's dead and the heart's dead, that cannot be the origins, it can't be the alpha and omega of consciousness. It's just not. So
Sure.
that was my excitement for, is just like, for me, it was like the health and well-being of the human. But to me, even deeper and further into that was like the aspect of growth in consciousness. It was the ability for one to grow physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, and feel more connected to themselves and others. That really was that's what excited me about chiropractic. And it's a simple premise. It's like, if the spine is being interfered with, then it affects how you receive and give information. So therefore, you're not when your spine's distorted, your perception of reality is distorted. And so that alignment then creates clarity and therefore a clear living experience. So that's been my, kind of path. And you mentioned we've gone beyond an extra, and, in the next year or so, I mean, we're going to be teaching what we're doing. Actually, 2023 is our first foray into that. And we're going to be teaching outside of the realm of chiropractic. So I'm stepping outside of chiropractic. Eventually, I'm sure at some point I will, let my license go and, be a regular Joe, be a civilian teaching what we do.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. Experiencing through the body, right? This alignment that causes, in some ways, it's the nervous system. But, I mean, a lot of people though are just thinking chiropractic, like, okay, my spine's aligned. Like, what's the big deal? Like,
Right.
thanks. But like,
Right.
so when you say the nervous system,
Mm-hmm.
in some ways, is it almost like, not when when my spine's aligned, my nervous system is at ease, or my nervous system is more correctly attuned. And this also might kind of circle back to one of the first points you made, which is, hey, this is a trauma-based learning center. Welcome
Right.
to planet Earth,
Yeah.
and maybe loop in some of those concepts as well. What would you say?
Yeah, totally. And so, the advanced above and beyond just the spine and the nerve system is
Mm,
ultimately, there is a confluence between the spine, the nerve system, and the energy body. So when I speak of the energy body, there's, again, there is more and more science research that's coming out that's saying, the ancients had it right all along, that we are not just physical beings having a
mm,
spiritual, we're not just physical beings having a physical experience, we're physical beings having a spiritual experience, and I would
mm,
reverse that as well and say we're spiritual beings having a physical. So it goes both ways. So with that, there is this energy that's in our body, you know, spoken about as prana, as chi, as life
mm,
force, depending upon the cultural lens you're, looking through. And that energy emanates above and beyond the body. So like a quick kind of easy way to know this is like, and it's so crazy to think that ATMs are kind of obsolete, but ultimately they are. But probably most people remember the days where you'd have to stand in line for an ATM, and
sure.
we could say that there is like an unwritten cultural awareness of like, you don't stand 2 inches behind the guy who's next in line because like he's just
Yeah.
right. But how do we know that someone's like 2 inches behind us?
Mhm.
But we know, we're sensitized. Like we're just like, what the, and we turn around and we're just like, dude, like what, can I help you? There's just like a, and because there is an energy that's around our bodies and we're sensitized to it.
Mhm.
Interestingly enough, it's most powerful not at the brain but at the heart. And so the Heart Math Institute, they're out of Northern California, where a lot of greats come from. And that was just self-referential. Gratuitous birth plug. They have been studying the energy around the body and locate it at the heart. And interestingly enough, it's about 6 to 7 to 8 feet, about the distance that we
Mm.
are all asked to stay away from each other for the little epidemic situation
I'm
that
sure
we
that had
had.
no negative
There was
consequences
no
whatsoever.
reason for that. No, because
Yeah.
viruses have been at the virus Olympics. The gold for virus jumping is only 5 feet. So they
Right.
know that if you're 6 feet away, there's no virus, that's even, not
Mhm.
even, the there's
The
just
best
no
of the
virus.
best.
Yeah, the best of the
Worldwide, yeah.
best. Yeah,
Right.
yeah, yeah. And of course, as was broken the 5 minute mile, I'm sure viruses will break the 5 foot
Yeah.
jump. But we have
Especially,
time.
especially
We
yeah,
have time.
especially when we have gain of function research that we
Yes.
we're artificially creating these things. But I love
Hmm.
the tangents we're able to go on.
Yeah,
Hopefully,
I'm a
you
tangential
listeners are
speaker.
following.
Yeah, are you
Yeah.
tracking?
Yeah.
So basically, when I'm looking at the body, I'm looking at that interface of how the spine, the nerve system, and the energy system, which also includes the fascial system, the connective
Mm.
tissue. So what's also interesting is, we're biased on this planet as humans. We think we're the best. And again, going back to, like, if humans are always saying we're the best, and, like, if you have to say it, are you really? Like, who's not
Mm.
saying it? Dolphins. And guess what? They're not saying it, and the research shows that they have much bigger brains than us. They have much more complicated social structures than we do. They express in ways that we can't. And they're also now finding that dolphins, when they send their little like signal, they're literally throwing out a 3D picture that can go through water, like, for hundreds of miles, and another dolphin pod can literally, so that a dolphin could see a human, basically scan a signal out that shows a picture of the face of the human, so a pod 100 miles away knows exactly what human looks like in the water. Like, that's how complex they are. And we're like, let me just look it up on Google,
Yeah.
because we're the best, because we have the most technology. It's like, so this is where I go, is outer technology, and this is really, if I wanted to talk on a piece tonight, it would be this. It's like,
Sure.
is the inner technology that we have as human beings, our human body, is it being explored and connected
Mm.
with the same level of focus, intention, intimacy, and devotion as we do to our outer technology, our phones,
Mm-hmm.
our computers, all the things, right? And in my opinion, no, we're not moving fast enough with our inner technology to match the pace at which outer technology is accelerating. I'm not against outer technology. I mean, that you and I can look at each other from across the country, stare at our beautiful, faces and instruments behind us.
Mm.
That's badass. I love that, right? Because we're not dolphins. We don't have that capacity. But I say different. I say we do have that capacity. We're just spending more time because it's easier to pop open the computer. So what I'm interested in is supporting people to explore their bodies, their nerve systems, their energy bodies in such a way where instinct, intuition, inspiration, insight becomes equal to thought, becomes equal to cognition. Because right now, most people are utilizing mostly cognitions to drive their life, which is thought, but they're not very instinctual, nor are they very intuitive, nor are they very insightful
Mm-hmm.
or inspired. And that is essentially because all of our focus is basically separated, disconnected from our bodies. And therefore, we're putting the proverbial cart in front of the
Mm-hmm.
horse, which is technology outer over
Mm-hmm.
technology inner, being
Mm-hmm.
body.
So we're hitting on the central premise, right? The central, we're getting to the deep, rich sort of differentiated insights here. What would you say then is the reason for that? Right? You listed four eyes. I don't know if I could call them off the top of my head. It was like
Mm,
instinctual,
right.
intuitive,
Intuition.
insightful, and
Hmm.
inspiration or
Inspiration.
something.
Yeah. Hmm.
So there's
Hmm.
like, I'm sure, I don't know if that was intentional or not, but for these four eyes, it's this, why aren't human beings consistently having revelations of
Yeah.
intuition? Why aren't they
Well,
having inspiration? And when you say disconnected, what's disconnecting them? What's getting in the way?
yeah. Well, it's a split that's happened. It's a split that's been talked about. Indigenous peoples have known this for years. They have stories that speak of it. There's a particular story called and I have a book coming out. This is in the book. But it's a story called the Condor and the Eagle, which is basically there are these two different ways of being. The condor is the more feminine, it's the more indigenous, it's the more intuitive. And the eagle, funny enough, and of course, this was before the story was told, before the advent of the United States, with the eagle representing it, which I think is very telling. But the eagle is the more masculine, it's the more physical in nature, instead of emotional, intuitive. Excuse me, not physical, more mental. It's more mental, and it's more technological. So there's this split. And in the story, it says at one point they would be warring at another point in time, which many indigenous cultures now speak to. Now is that time that they would fly together and mate, that there would be a unification of the indigenous ways of being on the planet and the modern ways. And so that is the split. That's the disconnection. We have grown and advanced in many areas, not connected to other areas. So we've grown intellectually, we've grown technologically, but we're not emotionally, nor are we connected to our bodies enough to support the level of intellect that we have. And so, Einstein said, something to the effect of like, it's appallingly obvious that our technology has exceeded essentially our compassion or our humanity. Right. And he was referring to that. He made that quote, and I kind of butchered it a bit, but he made that quote with reference to the advent of the atomic bomb. Yeah. He's basically saying like, look, great that we have the mathematics, the physics, the science to create this, but are we really grown up enough to handle something like this? Like, is this a good idea for us to continue?
Is that a hypothetical question?
Right. Right.
Like,
and same is true. Here we are now, and we have the advent of AI. We have the advent of robotics. We have all this stuff, and there are many people who are very concerned about these things. I'm not against them. I'm just saying, are we grown up to use this? It's like handing a gun to a loaded gun to a 5-year-old. It's like I'm not against guns, but I'm just saying, don't hand it to a 5-year-old. And so we're at this point where how do we close that gap? And this is really what I'm up to, what myself and Chelsea Ray, my wife, are up to, is basically taking this indigenous wisdom, bringing it with the lens of modernity. So it's like we're not saying get rid of modernity. We're not saying get rid of the modern ways. We can't stop that. That train is like well on its way going fast. But what we can do is while we're on the train going fast is we can have some conversations that say like, hey, there are some forks up in the road here and we have time. We have time to make decisions whether we go right, straight, or left here. And we can be cognizant of where each track takes us. And so to me, the wisdom of the indigenous people, of people who have lived closer and more connected to the earth, is really what's necessary in order to answer the question. And I see that their wisdom in what we've been working with is essentially that there is this technology through the elements that is in support of our inner body technology coming online in such a way where the capacity to be very connected to your physical body and your sensation, to not have to live a life based upon pain and discomfort driving your decisions, which is where many people are at. Many people on this planet right now are on some level of pain, whether it's physical, emotional, mental, spiritual. And in our opinion, is because we have lost our way relative to that connection to the earth, to water, to fire, to mineral, to air, to nature, of which the indigenous say like, hey, look, these are our ancestors. These are the ingredients of creation in this reality. We can translate that very easily to physics. And so there is this clear read as far as I can see that what the ancients knew. Now, how they knew that's a whole different story. But what they knew is here to inform this very important fork in the road that we're at with humanity.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think, yeah, that's a large part of the mission of this show is to help us navigate tough decisions wisely, right? And it's really
Yeah.
discernment, um, that can be personal decisions,
Right.
but we are being, you know, we are certainly thrust seemingly into a crash course here, kind of a we're heading towards the cliff in many different areas. And it's like, AI, right? Or
Right.
bioweapons or
Yeah.
nuclear weapons. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
we are essentially, just look at the last two presidents. I'm not a fan of either of them, one from each
Yeah.
side.
Right.
Um,
Right. Where do
neither.
we go from there?
It's like,
What do we do?
you trust them with, all of
Mm-hmm.
these, sorts of
Mm-hmm.
things. And
Yep.
we've been completely disconnected, honestly, from that. And then you look at COVID, you look at deaths of despair, whether it's drug overdoses or suicides.
Mm-hmm.
All of these things are going up. Even I was listening yesterday, work participation, even though like there's plenty of people to work, the people just aren't working.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
there's people just withdrawing. People aren't having kids. People are doing this. People are doing, there's so many different sort of things that were just like disconnected from what we're, you know, kind of designed to do. And the reason for that is, I suppose
Yeah.
it's the body, it's the experience that we're having, and we're just stuck in our head. Maybe there's some cultural elements to it. I'd love to hear you maybe even speak to that more. Um, I don't
The
know.
the cultural aspects of things.
Sure.
Um, I'm sorry. What's the question?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I'm just ranting about my own, like what I'm witnessing, and
Yeah. Yeah.
does
Well,
it
I
inspire
think.
any interest from you of like what
Mhm. I
what
think
you do?
totally. I think the point to me that's interesting. Interesting doesn't even cover it. Compelling, exciting, honestly, terrifying for
Mm,
sure. Um, and like we're at a point that, as far as human recorded history, so let's just say that, shows we've never been at before. And I think it's easy to look at it and we are coming apart at the seams.
mm,
And I think that is that's a powerful place to be. I think that part of the challenge is that for so long, which in terms of human history is like a drop in the bucket. But if you look at the lifespan of a fly, it's 4 days, right? But you got to imagine yourself as a fly. You don't have to, but I
mm,
do. As 4 days, and I'm thinking like, man, this is forever. This life is so long,
mhm,
and the same is true of humans. At most we're maybe pushing up to 100,
mhm,
and it seems like such a long time, but that's only because of how we experience the reality of time. It's a drop in the bucket, so quick. It's a flash. And so what's happening on the planet and the quickening of consciousness necessitates the falling apart of what has been, because the two are at odds with each other. And so
mm,
even though it seems like, oh my God, this is horrible, this is really bad, like if things continue in the way that they're going, they're going to get really rough. um, and only rough if you're hanging on to that which isn't working anymore. It's only challenging and painful and hard for those who somehow feel like the way things have been are the way things going to be. Like it's not.
mhm,
Things are going to change. And so if we are adaptable, if we're in for the ride, if we are in as not just the individuals, because that's that's the game that has been played, everyone out for themselves, it will not work in this next chapter. Like we are the single cell coming together as an as a multi-celled organism. That's the deal. It's all going to be about collaboration. It's all going to be about co-creation. That's the future. And so if you're in that now, you are a leading edge, adaptable human being ready for the ride of your life. If you're not, it's going to be rough. And we're going to lose a lot of people. People are just going to die. But people forget that that's part of the deal. Like, people get all bent out of shape about, I'm like, all these people are dying. It's like, well, you know that you're going to, right? Like, you know, that's part of the deal. Like that, everyone signs on to that. There's no one exempt from that. And so that a lot of people will die in this time period is not news. It's just that how they die, the way that things are going to fall apart is going to seem weird because we're in a time period where the falling apart is more important than the coming together first. I mean, nobody is going to hire someone to redo their kitchen and not expect them to do a whole lot of demolishing before they build. I mean, if you do one before the other, it's out of order and it doesn't make sense. But when we see that happen on a human level, on a cultural level, on a business level, on a money level, on a, you know, on a health and well-being level, you know, we poop our proverbial pants because you know, it's not a kitchen remodel. It's us. It's our life. It's a, you know, it's way more personal.
I want to make sure I'm attuned to what you're saying. So it's like, it's not that you don't have compassion, right, for these people who are,
No. Oh,
you know, it's like,
100%.
yeah,
I cry like every day. So, you know, like I literally do. If I go a day where I don't cry, and that may sound crazy to your listeners, but I mean, it's not a bad thing to me. It's not like my life
sure.
sucks. My life's amazing because I cry. I also feel a lot of joy. So, no, I have tons of compassion for people who lose people. I mean, my God, it's horrible, right? So I'm just saying in the grand scheme of life itself. So that's the other part. It's like
For sure.
we're not good with emotions enough to allow you know, when people die, we're numb from the experience, so it feels hard. But if we were, you know, in indigenous cultures, they have they have women who are there as wailers, as grievers, for to help the people who aren't so good at it. They're like, okay, and you cry about everything. Okay, you are officially the grievers, because when someone dies, you're obviously going to cry, right? So you're the cry obvi group. And in your crying, you're going to support people who suck at it, because there's a bunch of people in our community who suck at crying. It's no big deal. It's just, that's just how they operate. But they're thinkers. So we want them to be thinkers because that's important. So they have it baked into the matrix of their community to have people who are really good at crying to be in support of the people who suck at it. Right. So it's like a natural thing. Well, we have dismantled that, and we've pathologized it, and we disconnect it. You know, we sit in movies and watch people get blown to bits. Not anyone's shedding a tear. I'm like, how can you watch that shit and not lose your mind? So people have become so desensitized. So no, I'm saying the opposite. I'm saying become very sensitive to all this stuff and cry your brains out when something horrible happens. And that's the adaptability part. The people who are not adaptable and all this stuff, you know, if stuff does fall apart more than it already has been, which, you know, I mean, it kind of seems like it could, they're going to be frozen in a non-feeling, non-capable, non-doing space. And you know who's going to rise as the emergent leaders? The listeners of your podcast, like the people who you coach, because these are all the human beings who are curious and entrepreneurial, which means they're risk takers, and they're here for that ride. They're like, I'm here to create business that's not here. And if my business doesn't work, then I'll just create another business that needs to come in, because that's how entrepreneurs think. And those are the people who are going to be at the cutting edge. I see business as like the cutting edge of spirituality. I think a lot of people who used to be in the healing realm are now jumping into the entrepreneurial space because they're truly the adaptable, crazy risk takers. And they like doing outlandish, outrageous things that are not necessarily in the loop of, you know, the 9 to 5, what their parents did. They want to like work less and make more money. And but that's like their entry point in, just like my entry point into chiropractic is because my dad hung around a bunch of chiropractors. But then they get into it, and then they're going to realize the real reason that they did it. And you're like, oh, that was all kind of a ruse to get me where I really want to be, where I'm really supposed to be.
Well, thanks for clarifying, and thanks for helping the listener connect to that of just okay, we're it's all about living fully and fully expressing and fully feeling, right? And when you fully
Yeah.
feel the grief and the shame and the guilt or whatever it is on this side,
Yeah.
it frees you up, right, to feel this other
Yes.
side. And
That's right.
I actually just came back from Austin, Texas this past weekend. We were there with about 100. Um, it's kind of a cool group. You should check it out. We had the founder on the podcast. His name's John Vroman, and this is called Front Row Dads. It's
Nice.
only dads. Okay,
I love it.
everyone's in business, and they're a dad. So it's like
Uh-huh.
100 men coming together, and from all over the country.
Yeah.
And it was basically 3 days of what you're talking about, of
Yeah.
us doing weird shit and crying
Yeah.
our eyes out and creating safe
Yes.
spaces and containers. And
I,
I'm sure if someone just wandered in from off the street, or
yeah. They're just like, what are these
uh,
wackos
yeah,
doing?
exactly, yeah, totally, absolutely. But the feeling that we all had of connectivity, of freedom, of being alive, of connection with one another, even leaving, right? It's only been a few
Yeah.
days, but it's just like cleaner, clearer, better interactions with my wife, with my
Exactly.
kids. Everything is running smoother, right?
Yes.
And so
Exactly.
this just brings us back to like, well, okay, we've outlined the problem. What's the solution?
Yeah.
And like, how does your work get people there? Like, walk us through that a little bit.
Yep. Totally. So, the solution is basically connecting to the very things that make us up. So,
Mm-hmm.
if we take the lens of the indigenous and we agree that the elements, and look at any culture, look at Chinese culture, Japanese, Greek, European, they're all speaking of the elements. We look to the stars and we have them categorized according to the elements. um, Elements are a part of our human history. They always will be. Where would we be without water? Where would we be without air, without fire, without mineral? All these things, we're living because of these elements, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so they truly are the ingredients of creation. And so essentially, we support people through genius frequency methodologies, to connect in their bodies to the elements. And everyone has an elemental code. So everyone has a specific order of operations of each element. And from that order of operations, they experience the nature of reality, and are fully connected on a physical, emotional, mental, spiritual level. And so what happens in life is, because we live on a trauma-based, in a trauma-based learning school, our bodies have to learn how to protect in these moments and kind of bookmark. So it's like if you're scrolling, on your phone, like you find something on Instagram, you're like, oh, I want to check that out, but I don't have time to do it right now. So then you go to the website, you bookmark it, and then like, oh, when I'm just like hanging out on a plane or doing whatever, I'm just gonna that's when we go through all this stuff. But I need time and space to do it. So that's like trauma. It's like we don't have time and space to experience an experience. So we bookmark it. Our body does that for us. And we're basically going to bookmark that as a wound, which is basically wound, which is a winding. And so the winding of our tissues in the body, whether the neurological tissues, muscular, vertebral misalignment, connective tissue, all these things go into a winding pattern. It's a protection pattern, and it's a bookmark of energy and information that ideally, when we have time and space and safety and connection, that we check out. We look up that website and we go, what happened? And if we don't, then we're basically not accessing. It's like our hard drive speed doesn't go as well. Our connectivity to the internet doesn't work as well. Like, we get on the sites and it tends to crash for some reason. We've got a 5G phone, but it's only working with 2G. So everything's like a little bit clunky and messy. That's how humans operate when they're wounded. So essentially, when we're working with people, we're supporting them to first unscramble, because basically that code scrambles for protection. And so when it unscrambles, it allows for the free flowing transmission of energy and information that we call our real life experience. And as that happens, people feel things. They feel emotions. They feel sensations that they haven't. They start to feel pains and tensions in their body start to unwind. They start to recognize these repeating thought patterns of negativity that have plagued them for years and years and couldn't find the pause or the off button to all of a sudden start to shift or disappear. They start to become aware of memories of themselves in certain parts of their life and understand why the trauma happened. And they don't have to have someone translate for them. They start to become their own translator of these experiences, such that there's a clarity there that guides and informs them to the ultimate, which is essentially remembering like who you are and why the F you're here. So that's all done through essentially, working on the body and the energy body around. And also we have a whole series of explorations in the body. And this is, what we're launching come 2023 is how do you work with your own body to connect with the elements, and with your own two hands and nothing more necessary, you can literally unwind the traumas of your life that are keeping you from you and are interfering with the clarity of, answering all the great questions. Why are you here? What's your value? What are you supposed to do? What are you supposed to eat today? All those things. Yeah.
Well, I mean, if you're listening and that doesn't sound interesting to you, please go find another podcast. No, I mean, it's like, this is. It's
listen
like,
to the Worse Than Poor podcast, because that's probably more.
That's more your alley, up your alley. So it's like, what am I here for? What am I here to do? What are my gifts? What are my strengths? Like, what am I supposed to do today? How should I respond to this person? Excuse me. For some reason, I got a frog in my throat. But this is like, this unlocks, in some ways, it's the key to unlocking a lot of your, life's biggest mysteries, all the way down to like the most mundane, like, should I take this phone call right now? Let me think.
Exactly.
And it's actually less like, let me think. It's like, let me feel into this. Right.
Exactly.
Energetically, intuitively, instinctually, right? Is this the phone call I should take right now, or should I let it go to voicemail? And you just know, right?
Right.
And to the extent that you're wound and, hurt and burdened by these sorts of things, you're going to just be making error after error after error.
Exactly. Totally. Lots of user error in that scenario.
Yeah. And so I think this adds up, and it makes a ton of sense. So, I mean, and then the fact that you're starting to be able to teach this is really amazing. Real quick, do you have a hard stop, or can we keep going for a little bit longer?
We can keep going for a little bit. Yeah.
So, help me understand, because you're doing a course here. You're going to start introducing this concepts at an even deeper level. You got the book coming out. I mean, there's a lot of exciting things that you and Chelsea Ray are up to. What's it look like? How does someone get involved? Is there a spot where we can send them that, they can get more information, or what would you say to that?
Yes. Well, get involved now, and you're going to see our literal transformation from kind of like one way of being on the planet. You'll see basically the caterpillar to the butterfly, because we're in the process of literally. I mean, I just looked at and approved, both Chelsea and I just looked at and approved like our branding logo. So we literally that was today. So what I would say for now is, if you're on Instagram, find us at Nourish Flourish now. And that will transform into Genius Frequency soon. But just stay with it. You can go to our website, nourishflourishnow.com, and you can watch. Go to the bottom of any page and just give us your email, and we'll send you a 90-minute video called Meet Your Genius. And we take you through the whole thing. Like, what we do? Where did it come from? So it's really like laying out in 90 minutes the whole thing, plus a couple demonstrations, so you can see, like, what does a human body look like when it's expressing the elements? Because this is wild. I mean, it is weird and cool, and like, you'll potentially do a double take if you haven't seen stuff like this before. So check it out. And then, so yes, on the book, and then we have an online course coming up, which we're so excited about. This is our first opportunity to really teach this to people so that they can become more self-sustaining. Because at this point, we're the only two people who are doing it. So it's been set up kind of perfectly that way, because the way really for us is we want to create something. The vision's always been, how do we create something that's self-sustaining where we are not as necessary? And by the way, I may have painted a picture at some point in time where, it seems like I'm suggesting, hey, Mike, I'm suggesting that, like, hey, you just do this stuff and like your life is perfect and you don't need anyone. You just be you and the elements and you're all good and golden. And I want to make sure that I'm clear that actually the opposite is true. That the more, here's what's inevitably will happen. If you connect to yourself more deeply, the next thing that will happen is you will invariably want support. You will invariably want coaching. You will invariably want, because you'll be attracted to being in community. Because once you connect deeply with yourself, then it's like, life is not fun unless there's someone else to jam with, to play with, to interact with. Like, that is the whole reason we really come down here. It's like, once we get through the trauma shit, like, living life and connecting and collaborating with people is just fun. I mean, like, when I got the email from you, it was like, hey, do you want to be on the podcast? I'm like, do I want to talk with Andrew Biggs for like an hour? Like, of course, like, and have it recorded, because I know what's going to happen if it's like you and me on the phone. Like, we'll have a great conversation. We always have. But if it's you and me on the phone for something bigger than ourselves, then there's this element of like, ooh, what's gonna happen? Like, what am I gonna say, or what are you gonna say, or how are we gonna inspire each other in some way that's like bigger than what we would do individually or even collectively for just ourselves?
I love it. I love it. I think that's one of the key missing things, like community in general, just like how isolated we are, how like atomized we are. I think a lot of the dysfunction happens there, where it's just like, if I could just like, as soon as I do something stupid, if I could just call you and be like, I just did this really stupid fucking thing. Like, can you just witness my like stupidity for a second? And you go, hey man, I've been there too. In fact, I did that last week. It's all good. And like, and I could be like, okay, like I'm okay, back to work. Yeah.
Well, I mean, honestly, both you and I, Andrew Biggs, are as whole as we are today because you and I did that for each other at one point in our life. Sure. Like, we literally did, like, staring at each other's eyes, and we had a deep moment of exchange. And like, I was a different person after that. You were a different person after that.
Yeah.
It is all in the community. That the magic happens. And that, in kind of in answer to the question that you asked earlier, it's like, well, where did we go wrong? What's the missing thing? It's community. There's no indigenous one person. There's no such thing as an indigenous person. It's always indigenous communities. There's not indigenous Bob, who lives in, Saskatchewan. Like, it doesn't exist.
And what Brian is referring to is, we had the opportunity, and we actually did something similar this past weekend, but we sat across from each other, and the instruction was, obviously everything is confidential, but share whatever, your deepest, darkest secrets, or whatever you're ashamed of you've ever done. And it was a really powerful moment. And for both of us, and we just happened to get partnered up, which I'm sure that was no coincidence. Of course. But this past weekend we did something similar, and again, people were sharing some stuff that maybe they'd never told anybody. And Preston Smiles came in. He's a really cool guy, and he kind of led us through this workshop, and just the how everyone felt, right? Just getting things off their chest. And I don't know.
What a beautiful last name for what he does, right?
I know, right? I was like, is that like a stage name? I gotta look that up and see if it's really his last name. But anyway, I love everything that we're sharing here. I think this is really, really great. Talk to me, personal question. This is the first time you and I have connected, at least publicly, since you've gotten married, to Chelsea Ray, and you guys are on this incredible journey together. What's it like, man? How's married life treating you? Is you living the dream, or or what's going on there?
It's amazing. It's really good. It's really profound. I'm so grateful for our collision, her and I. I mean, it's magical how it all transpired, and like I I wake up every day and I'm kind of just like, how did all this happen?
It's kind
When?
of a wild
You know,
story. I mean,
it really it
there's like a
is.
lot of, you know,
It's a
quote unquote
magical story in and of itself.
coincidences. Yeah,
There
exactly.
is. and
Yeah.
and you know, I mean, maybe, there are pieces of our story in the book. Like, so the book
Hmm.
that I'm writing, finishing right now, is a combination of stories of my personal life, and then also stories to inform, like on a personal level, how it relates to the elements or genius frequency
Sure.
in some way, shape, or form. So, um, and I also want to say, like, as amazing and magical and beautiful as a relationship is, and it is, like, every day, I know I always wanted to be. I mean, when I was like, God, I was like 7 years old, when I was in like first and second grade. Like, I had girlfriends. I was so into, like, I wanted the love
Mm-hmm.
of my life from when I was like 6 and 7 years old. Like, I've
Mm-hmm.
always been a very romantic, like, my nickname when I was like in preschool was Lover Boy, because I just like went up and hugged everyone and everything. But
I can
then,
see that.
as I
I love
grew up, like, it's like, if you're a boy and you're just like hugging everything and you want to be in a relationship, like, there are names for that, man. There
it.
are
Mm-hmm.
names on the schoolyard, and like other
Mm-hmm.
boys, rightfully so, like, kind of figuratively, not so much literally, but beat the crap out of me. Like,
Sure.
they, and it was hard, and it was good for me because I needed to be informed about the culture that I was moving into. And they were saying, like, dude, you're not going to make it. Like, you're in Catholic school and we're going to teach you how things are out there. And if you can't square up with this reality, like, you're going to be sauce. And so I was
Mm-hmm.
glad that I was informed. It was very painful. It led to a lot of kind of the traumas that I would, live on later down life. But I would eventually unwind to my natural state, which is a loving human being for the most part, that wants to be in a deep, intimate relationship. So that this all happened is incredible to me. Now, that all being said,
Mm-hmm.
I was married prior to this relationship, and um, I, when I left, thought a lot of the things that were wrong in our relationship were not necessarily because of me.
Mm-hmm.
And boy, was I wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I could not have been more wrong. And so all those things were waiting for me at the door. Like, so as soon as the moment where it's just like all the, the beauty and all the magic and all that stuff, it was just like I opened the door and all that shit was just right there. It was just like, okay, are you ready? You still need to deal with this.
Right.
And so I'm saying that because I want to be clear and authentic, because sometimes I know when I've heard about other relationships and, like, a person's like, oh, they found the person they love and their soulmate and their twin flame and their, all whatever the words you want to throw on top of the
Yeah.
relationship, that somehow makes it unicorny. I would focus on the corny part of things and get pissed and just be like, really? Come on. Like, tell me the real stuff. Like, there's more to the story. And so, I am here to say, like, with all the magic that we have, like, I've had to navigate and deal with the same stuff that I left off at the relationship. It was not her fault. It was not my former wife's
Mm-hmm.
fault. Of course, she's a human being. She has her stuff too. We came together, but she's a wonderful, amazing person. And we actually have a great relationship now.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say, like, I came on an early podcast and I made some comment and she, like, heard it. And I was just like, oh God, how could I be so stupid and blind and arrogant? And so, and back then, earlier on, I was like, no, it's not me. I'm fine. Like, it wasn't me.
Mm-hmm.
So, I feel very grateful that I have the relationship that I do. I feel incredibly blessed. And I think what makes it so powerful now is, like, she and I are so willing to go wherever we need to go to get the magic and the love that we know exists. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it's clunky.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I just appreciate how you just eloquently stated all that. And, for the listener who's, maybe in a relationship and struggling, I think it's a great reminder. And with, the men I was just hanging out with this past weekend, it's like, yeah, there's a lot of great things about relationships. And it's also, it doesn't exist solely to please you. It's there to push you and to help you grow. Like, why wouldn't it?
Exactly.
Why wouldn't your
Exactly.
significant other, your spouse, be your teacher, maybe your best
Exactly.
teacher? And
Right.
so,
Right.
just, the realization that, everything that you're, pointing the finger at your significant other for, yeah, maybe
Right.
consider taking a deeper look at it.
Yeah.
And, you know, especially I think, as men, we can tend to be, kind of push the onus onto our women. And there's a lot that we need to look at. She's responding to you. She's responding to your leadership. She's
Yeah.
looking for you to lead the way. And if she's not getting it, then, and you're wondering why she's a ball buster. Well, maybe you need to step up
Yeah.
and be
Yeah.
the man that, she was looking for in the first place, or that you were for the first years of your relationship. So, yeah.
Yeah. That's
Well,
a
hey,
whole other podcast.
oh yeah, or we can just we can go for 3 hours now. Just let us play it. I know we should probably start heading for the exit. So we always ask our
Yeah.
guests, Brian, three questions
Mm.
before we depart. The first question is, what do you think the world needs most right now?
um, I'm sure that I would have answered that with, love maybe 5 years ago.
Mm,
And certainly the world needs love. There's no doubt about that. I think right now in this moment, how I'd answer that, or how I am going to answer that, is the world needs more right now remembering. And
mm,
I mean that in a number of different ways. Um, Go deep enough within yourself at whatever level, whatever way you want. And there are many of them on the planet. Um, you will start to remember why you're here. In your bones is deep memory that was set into vibrational motion when you were born. When your head was squeezed out through your mom, there was a signal that was sent, that was implanted. And like a tree that grows hundreds of years, and there are, for each year, a ring of that tree that if we cut it, we could count it. In the center of that tree is the information and the energy that is the same as the seed. And so in the same way, in the deepest part of our bones, we have memory of why we're here. And it's, it's so easy to look out there and go like, well, where is it? It's, there's a reason the sages of the ages have been saying, look inside for a long time, because it's true. So I would say, remember that. And then I would also really look at remembering as a point of reference for what are you remembering? Like, are you remembering all the things that bring you pain?
mm,
And are you reminding yourself of those things? And if so, it's probably because you just haven't digested enough of your past. It just says that you're traumatized. And so
mm,
that's a good sign and signal. If your memory is that of pain, and you're not looking back at your life and seeing, even if you had horribly shitty things happen, um, if you're not able to translate those horrible, shitty things as the reason why you're so amazing now, then that is a clue into your need to do some deeper work, which is going to make your life so much better.
mm.
So that's what I think the world needs to do right now, is remember who we are and why we're here.
Great answer. And if you find yourself not remembering the right things, there's lots of bookmarks for you to go back and
That's right.
check out. I really liked your
Exactly.
analogy there. Number two is what 1 to 3 books would you recommend everyone read? And don't say Seven
Uh,
Habits of Highly Effective
yeah,
People and
don't
some
worry.
mainstream.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, here's the good news on that one. I probably have read 7 books over the course of my lifetime. So for any
Okay.
of you
Cool.
out there
So pick
that
two.
thinks that you need to be a well-read person to be a well-rounded human, it's not
There
true.
you go. I love it.
But one book that I have read and love, and one of my teachers that highly informed me in a very short, quick moment. I've had teachers that been with for decades. This particular gentleman was around for only a few years of my life, and he recently passed, actually right around this time period. In fact, today or yesterday I think was his leaving a year ago. And
Mm.
that's Malidoma Patrice Somé. And I would highly recommend checking out his book, The Healing Wisdom of Africa. It is a brilliant lens of humaning. If you want to see how some people do it on this planet, and do it very effectively, check this book out. It's quite astounding. So that would be the one book.
Let's do
I'd
that.
give it
I
to you,
mean,
but yeah, perfect.
that sounds awesome, and it sounds very unique. So thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
So the final question is, what does it mean to you to be better than rich?
I love that. It's a great question. It's a gratuitous plug at the same time.
That's what I was going for.
It's such a good title. I love a good name. So I
Yeah.
love Better Than Rich. I think it's brilliant. Better Than Rich is, I think it's great because I think people have, as people have, with many words, they have a particular, it's like, well, what do you mean by rich, right? And so I think a lot of people fall into the category of like, well, rich, like loaded, lots of money in the bank, or in the various ways that you can have money. And I know, because I know you, that the way that you're stating that is that, what would be above and beyond just the money, like, what, and in fact, what does rich mean? So you're actually, by stating better than rich, you're making a statement, you're actually asking a question as well. So I love it. So to me, better than rich is like if you didn't have all the money in the world and you woke up every day so excited and thrilled at the potential of what that day could be, and you went to bed just like, oh my God, I'm going to sleep so hard tonight. Like physically, you're just like, I feel my body. I like worked hard, and emotionally you feel like just spent, but in the best of ways. Mentally you're just like, I can't think another thought, and that to me is like better than rich, and then a life lived like that in today's world. Like, yeah, you can have money in the bank. Yeah, you can have customers and clients. Like, yeah, you're going to have whatever it is that you want, because the obvious attraction of someone who has and is living that level of life, everyone's going to want to say like, dude, what are you doing? Like, excuse me, ma'am, who are you? And how can I get in touch with whatever it is that you're in touch with? So to me, that's better than rich. It's just like the day lived so well that you don't really think so much about, what happened yesterday, or that, and of course, contained within that is, a lot of things that people are telling us that we ought to do, which is be here, be present, etc.
No disrespect to any of my previous podcast guests, but that might be my favorite answer to that question. So thank you so much, Brian. This was super fun. One more time, remind people where they can find you and learn more. What's the best place to find you?
So physically, we're in Asheville, North Carolina, and we operate a practice one day a week called The Sanctuary at Nourish and Flourish. You can find us online at nourishflourishnow.com, and you can find us on Instagram and Facebook at Nourish Flourish Now as well. And again, that will all be changing to Genius frequency, but we'll leave trails so you'll know.
You'll get the breadcrumbs from the universe and from the algorithms.
Yes.
So
exactly.
Well, hey, this was super fun, listener. If you enjoyed this episode, we have a ask of you. We would love for you to share this with a friend, or to give us a rating and review on Spotify or iTunes or wherever you're listening to this. Until next week, remember to leave today better than you found it. We'll see you then. Thanks. Bye. What's up, guys? Biggs here. I hope you enjoyed that clip. If you did, go ahead and check out the other video that's being recommended on the screen right now. You can also subscribe to our channel. And then if you really are interested in what we do, go to automatedelegatesystemize.com to learn more about what we're up to. Thanks again.